Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a drama/thriller from South Korea, Korean language English subs, released in the year 2018, directed by John Bin-yoon, and this film is called The Spy Gone North. So The Spy Gone North is centered upon the rivalry between North Korea and South Korea, and in this film you've got a spy who is recruited by the South Korean intelligence, and his job is to make it seem like he's going into North Korea for an advertisement, but in fact what he's trying to get is information surrounding their nuclear program. So there are officials in South Korea who are a little bit concerned about this, and they want this spy to go in and try and get secret information, and at the same time try and keep his cover as this advertiser. But then as this agent goes into North Korea, he starts to suspect there is a lot more than he first thought, and that the game of trust is becoming very, very blurry. So whether or not he can achieve his mission is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on The Spy Gone North. I had a few hesitations coming into this movie, but the reason why I wanted to watch it was that it was a South Korean film. Now, my hesitations were, number one, it's a South Korean film that no one really talks about, so there is a reason for that. These unknown South Korean films, they are very hit and miss. Number two, it was a drama/political thriller. Now, I'm not a massive fan of political thrillers, and so for that reason I was umming and ahhing about whether or not I would enjoy this movie, is because there are a lot that just political sort of thrillers, they don't interest me as much. It's much more about talking than it is about car chases and explosions. And so I had to get myself in the right mindset to watch this movie. So I actually put this movie off for quite some time because I just didn't really feel like watching a political thriller. But then I finally got myself into the mood, and I watched this movie, and I will say that although it is very it's passable, it's a very worthy addition to South Korean cinema, it's still not an overly memorable film. Is that there is a lot of movies that document North and South Korea and the animosity between the two countries, and a lot of spy thrillers are out there as well, centering upon this certain subject. And so The Spy Gone North doesn't really form a shadow of its own. It is, as I said, it's a passable film. If you watch the movie, you'll think to yourself, that was worth the effort, and it was worth the time it took to actually watch the film. But at the end of the day, it just doesn't have that memorable quality. There is a certain sort of forgettable element that this movie has, which prevented me from absolutely loving it. But what I liked about this film is that the script keeps you interested. And that's ultimately what you want for a political thriller. It is a movie about a spy, but it's definitely based on script. It's based on dialogue. It's these actors and their performances that are under the microscope, because there is no car chases, there are no shootouts. And so it's a thriller for a very acquired taste, so be very careful of that. But I thought it did a good job to sustain my interest. I was never bored. Although I wasn't overly thrilled and I wasn't overly satisfied, I still wasn't bored. I wasn't looking at my watch just because I wanted to know what was going on. Ultimately, you have to create a line of breadcrumbs, and the viewer has to follow those breadcrumbs. As soon as the viewer gets distracted or doesn't really care about following them and doesn't really care about the ultimate outcome, then ultimately your film's going to fall apart. So I think that the director does a good job at maintaining that level of interest, because the characters are somewhat interesting. So the acting was very good, and I like the fact that it is very grey in the film. It would have been easy to say South Korea were the good guys, North Korea the bad guys, but this movie kind of blends that in a little bit, and so there's a lot of grey matter. And so there are things that the South Koreans do that were a little bit dodgy, and there were things that the North Koreans were doing that were a little bit dodgy, but there's a lot of humanity within the two groups. The agents for North Korea, there was one guy in particular that was very likeable, and there were some likeable guys on the South Korean side. And so you say to yourself, all right, well, this war and this animosity between the two countries is a waste, is because there are good people on both sides, but unfortunately it's the governments that just can't really get along. And so that does kind of pose the question, although it's not an overly thought-provoking film, it's still a film where you think to yourself, okay, well, the news outlets and the media will paint certain countries as very bad, but they don't really humanise the certain citizens in that country or the workers. Is that you still have good people in bad countries. And so that is ultimately what this film does. It does create a lot of blurry matter, which ultimately leaves you in limbo. You don't know who to support, is because the North Korean guys, some of them are actually really nice, and some of the South Korean guys were actually fairly bad. And so you don't really have a team to root for in this movie, which is something that I thought was the most impressive quality. Would have been easy to be a patriotic film and say that South Koreans are the good guys, North Koreans are the bad guys, and there is basically black and white, and there's no in between. But the movie does have a lot of in between, and that's why your interest is sustained from start to finish. I thought the soundtrack was actually quite good. A lot of South Korean films pay a lot of attention to their production. I thought the production was excellent. The cinematography is fantastic. The soundtrack was fantastic, and that's everything that is a trademark of this that style of cinema from this particular part of the world. But unfortunately, as I said, there's just a very forgettable quality to the movie, is that there are a lot of spy sort of drama / political thrillers out there, and this movie just doesn't warrant its own identity. I thought that there were moments that were predictable. Now, I've said this in previous reviews, that if you know what's going to happen, it's a cheat sheet. You go into an exam and if you already know the answers, you don't have that suspense of whether or not you're going to know the answer. And in this film, I felt as though it was that cheat sheet, is that there were moments that when they transpired, I kind of knew that was going to happen. I was playing fortune teller. And so the story, the overall story, it's maintained very well through the script, but ultimately it is forgettable because I always felt as though it was reminiscent of films that I've seen in the past, and unfortunately the films that I've seen in the past were just a little bit better than this one. So by the end of the film, I was happy that I watched this movie, but as far as the South Korean standard is concerned, it doesn't quite live up to it. This is second tier sort of South Korean cinema, but it's well made, it is interesting, and so if you are a fan of political sort of thrillers, then I would say go out there and see it, but don't get your hopes up that this is going to be a South Korean masterpiece. So overall, for The Spy Gone North, going to give this one 3 stars. Still go out there and see it, it is watchable. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching movies, and I'll see you later.